Good afternoon. Welcome back to Echoes of Myth and Time, where ancient stories awaken. Before cities and wars, before kings and poets carved names into stone, there was only the dark silence, a realm without language, direction, or memory. Not chaos, not order, but something older than both, a quiet suspension where not even time dared to breathe. The void was not empty. It dreamed. From those dreams came faint ripples, like distant waves in a sea that had never known water. In those ripples lay questions, not spoken, not written, but felt. What could be? What should be? What must be? And from the heaviest of those questions, the void tore open, just slightly, and a thread of shimmering light spilled into existence. Not bright, not blinding, just enough for the darkness to finally notice itself. That thread became Seryan, the first spirit. His essence was not flesh or bone, nor smoke or fire. He was potential, wrapped in the ache of futures yet unmade. His eyes, if they could be called that, did not see forms, they saw possibilities. Where nothing stood, he saw cities. Where darkness slept, he saw horizons. Where silence echoed, he heard symphonies no mortal ear would ever detect. But Seryan was not alone for long. From the shadow opposite his light came Nimra, the spirit of endings. To her, Seryan's visions felt incomplete. What good was a dawn without a dusk to measure it against? What meaning would futures hold if nothing ever finished? Nimra walked softly, and wherever she passed, dreams solidified, then cooled, then faded, only to leave new spaces for others to form. If Seryan was birth, Nimra was closure. For a brief eternity, a span neither long nor short, light and shadow studied each other. Not as rivals, nor as lovers, but as mirror halves of the same yearning. It was only when they touched that the third spirit formed. Where Seryan's endless futures met Nimra's endings, sparks coiled into a spiral, and the spiral condensed into Avelos, the cycle binder. He was neither beginning nor end, but the thread between. Balance made living. Avelos stretched out his hand, or something like a hand, and wove the first loom. It did not sit on a table or floor. It hung between the spirits, suspended by questions and held together by intent. When Seryan fed it light, the loom hummed. When Nimra fed it darkness, it tightened. And when Avelos fed it time, it spun. What emerged was the first world thread, thin as hair, fragile as breath. A single line of existence, trembling with uncertainty. But once born, the thread demanded more. Creation is greedy by nature. Soon, thousands of threads glimmered across the loom, tangled and intersecting, forming shapes that could almost be called histories. But threads alone do not make worlds. They needed a stage. With a gesture too subtle for sight, Seryan unfurled a vast domain, a canvas of silvery dusk, a place meant for matter and motion. Into it, Nimra pressed boundaries, horizons, edges, limits. Without limits, nothing becomes meaningful. Without boundaries, infinity becomes boredom. Then Avelos breathed rhythm into the domain, intervals, beats, pulses. And rhythm became time. For the first time since the void's dreaming began, something moved. At first, the world was soft, not earth, not air, not sea, but an ocean of vapors and ideas, swirling in silence. Then came weight. Gravity, though no mortal had named it yet, curled itself around the vapors and pulled them downward, compressing them into continents of molten stone. Cracks formed. Ridges broke. Valleys sank. The world stretched and groaned like a newborn creature unsure of its limbs. Above the stone seas, clouds of iron and crystal churned in scorching storms. Lightning, raw, primitive, unaware of its future purpose, tore across the skyless firmament. Each flash scorched new scars into the molten plains, cooling some into rock, vaporizing others back into mist. None of this was accidental. Seryan observed the world with the impatience of a sculptor unsatisfied with rough clay. Nimra watched with quiet approval, endings always arrive, even for worlds. And Avelos, he listened. To the crack of rock, the hiss of steam, the heartbeat of time within matter. Unknown to them all, the void watched too. Not as a ruler or god, but as a witness to an experiment it had not expected. 100 ages passed, long enough for land to cool, seas to collect, and winds to carve the first coasts. Geography wrote itself with no hands to guide it. The first forests were not trees, not yet. They were crystalline spires that grew from mineral reefs, glittering in sunlight that had never touched leaves. When storms passed, the spires chimed like 1,000 distant bells, echoing across the empty continents. No creatures roamed the world. No eyes admired it. Beauty existed alone. But a world without witness is a story without voice. It yearns to be seen. It was Seryon who first spoke of life. Form, he whispered, his words vibrating through raw matter. Let the world shape that which can remember. Nimra frowned, memory was dangerous. Anything that remembers can fear. Anything that fears can defy. But she did not argue. Endings can only exist if something exists to end. Avelos reached for the loom again, weaving finer threads, delicate, fragile, trembling. Threads that could break or multiply, win or wither. Out of those threads came the first living things, not beasts or men, but tiny organisms drifting in shallow seas, glowing faintly in tides of mineral-rich foam. They endured. That made them worthy. From simple forms came complex ones. From complex ones came hunger. Hunger made motion. Motion made change. Life spread. The crystalline forests shattered, replaced by layered canopies of primitive ferns that drank warmth from the sun. Land crawled with six-legged scavengers, their shells glinting like metal. Seas darkened with swarms of scaled shadows darting through the depths. Then came predators, because creation without danger leads only to stagnation. Nature learned to kill, and thus learned to grow. Centuries layered upon centuries until the world no longer felt new. It felt lived in. It was during this age that something extraordinary occurred, not by divine command, but by evolution's stubborn will. In the fertile basin of a wide southern continent, beneath the shade of ancient copper-leaved ferns, the first creatures stood upright against the pull of the earth. Their bodies were lean, their faces narrow, their movements cautious but curious. They were not yet mortal men. Their speech was instinct, not language. Their prayers were gestures, not words. But their eyes carried questions. And questions make civilization inevitable. Seryon watched them with fascination. Nimra watched them with concern. Avelos watched them with calculation. Let us not interfere, Nimra warned. Life becomes false when guided. Let it reach its own tragedies. Let it reach its own wonders, Seryon countered. Avelos said nothing. But he wove subtle adjustments into time, just enough pressure to nudge growth, not enough to force destiny. The creatures began to cluster. They built crude shelters from woven reeds and hardened clay. They discovered fire not as a gift, but as a theft, taken from striking stones during storms, tamed after many burns and failures. With fire came warmth. With warmth came gatherings. With gatherings came stories, clumsy, fragmented, half superstition, half memory. But memory is the seed from which myth grows. They learned to bury their dead, arranging stones around bodies as though marking passage. They mourned even when they did not understand mourning. They feared even before they understood what death was. Fear is the parent of faith. Faith is the parent of gods. But gods had not yet formed. Spirits existed, yes, but spirits without names are forgotten. A nameless power is indistinguishable from weather. And so the world continued. Not with spectacle, but with slow persistence, the only true magic creation ever needs. Then, one winter colder than any before it, something unprecedented happened. One of the upright creatures looked up, truly looked, and saw the stars not as distant lights, but as patterns. He followed those patterns with his finger, tracing lines only he understood, and his thoughts stirred with meaning. He felt awe. He felt wonder. He felt small. And in that smallness, he sensed the possibility of something greater. He did not name it. He only breathed it. But that single breath changed everything. Because the moment mortals believe in something beyond themselves, the beyond begins to form. As that winter thawed and the rivers melted, Ceryon approached the loom once more, curiosity thrumming through him. Soon, he whispered. Soon, they will ask. Nimra turned her gaze to the newborn graves and the trembling shelters. And when they ask, she replied, they will suffer for the answer. Avelos traced a thread between them. They will suffer regardless. Suffering is simply the currency of becoming. The three spirits watched their fledgling world, knowing that creation was no longer their own. Worlds do not belong to makers once people learn to dream. And the mortals were beginning to dream. One night, as the tribes gathered around a fire, the first storyteller began to speak. His voice cracked, his language crude, but his tale carried shape. He spoke of lights in the sky that watched, of shadows in the forest that listened, of spirits in the wind that guided hunters home. His listeners leaned close. Not for entertainment, but for understanding. They wanted meaning. And where meaning is demanded, myth awakens. The tribes slept with questions. The spirits watched with interest. The void waited with patience. Because the age of animals was ending. The age of stories was beginning. He winters of the early world were merciless. Long before kingdoms rose or temples glittered, survival ruled every decision. Fire meant life. Water meant hope. Hunger meant death. The upright beings, not yet human as we know them, yet no longer beasts, learned patterns. They tracked migrations of herd animals, memorized fruiting seasons of wild groves, and recognized rivers as the veins of the earth. Knowledge was not written, it was lived. But knowledge shared became power. As generations passed, clusters of related families merged into tribes, guided by elders who remembered more winters than the rest. Memory became currency. Those who remembered where berries once grew or which paths wolves stalked were respected. With time, tribes learned that wandering cost lives. So they settled, first for a season, then for a year, then long enough for clay huts to harden in the sun and for the soil beneath their feet to feel like inheritance. These early settlements were not cities, not yet. But they were the first defiance against chaos. In a valley carved between two slow rivers, a settlement called Erethen formed, named not for a hero or a leader, but for a sound uttered by a child pointing toward the river bend. Language in those days was simple, half symbols, half breath. But once a name clung to a place, it settled there like dust. Erethen built no walls. They built hearths. Night after night, the hearths glowed, not just with fire, but with gatherings. It was around those flames that the first storytellers found their voice. Fire demanded attention. Shadows danced against the clay walls. The crackle of wood sounded like punctuation. Silence felt like expectancy. The stories themselves were not grand. They were fragments of fear, wonder, curiosity, and guesswork. The stars move because they remember where to go. The river is angry because we took too many fish. The wind carries our dead to the mountains. These were not lies, nor truths. They were attempts at meaning, and meaning was more necessary than certainty. No one told the spirits to listen. And yet they did. Seryon hovered beyond perception as the storyteller of Erethen spoke into the night, his gestures animated, his eyes bright. Every word stretched the boundary between ignorance and imagination. Nimra observed funerals, if they could be called that. Bodies laid with care, not tossed aside. Stones balanced in circles. Flowers arranged though no one knew why. Ritual began long before religion. Avelos listened to mothers soothing crying infants, to hunters arguing about migration paths, to lovers whispering secrets in the dark. Time made these things precious simply by letting them repeat. The spirits did nothing to interfere. Creation must choose its own shape. Seasons layered upon years until Erethen was no longer alone. Other settlements formed across the southern plains, Kelluran, Vestra, Amin, and Sorel. None shared language, but all shared curiosity. It was inevitable that they would meet. The first encounter between tribes was not war, nor trade, nor alliance. It was confusion. At the confluence of 3 rivers, a group from Kelluran crossed paths with hunters from Erethen. They stared at one another across the misted banks, spears raised more out of instinct than hostility. The Kelluran hunters pointed at the river and spoke in their tongue. The Erethen hunters shook their heads and answered in theirs. Neither understood. Finally, one of the Kelluran men dropped his spear and began mimicking a deer, leaping with exaggerated grace. The Erethen hunters recognized the gesture instantly. They laughed, the first diplomacy in history conducted through pantomime. Trade came next. Meat for obsidian. Bark resin for flint. And with trade came shared stories. Stories traveled faster than goods. They moved through memory, across nights, through the mouths of those who saw the world differently. The stars overhead, once silent ornaments, now carried meaning between tribes. Hunters compared constellations, tracing shapes with soot-blackened fingertips. In Erethen, the 7 bright stars near the horizon were called the Watchers. In Kelluran, the same stars were the sisters who never sleep. Different names, same all. Patterns became myth long before myth became doctrine. But progress always brings questions, and questions bring tension. In Sorel, the elders noticed that some children survived sickness while others died. Why? Bad luck? Bad spirits? Cursed water? Or simply the indifference of nature? Without answers, fear grew. Fear births belief. One night, after a fever claimed 2 children, the mother of the 3rd carried her living son to the river. She knelt, hands trembling, and dipped his forehead into the cold water. She whispered promises, not to a god, not to a spirit, but to something. Something unnamed. Something that listened because she needed it to. At dawn, the child awoke. His fever broke. And a rumor spread that the river heard her. No spirit confirmed this. No god struck lightning. No voice echoed in the sky. But belief does not require response. Only opportunity. Soon, others followed. Mothers brought herbs, fathers brought fish, children brought pebbles smoothed by water. Offerings, though no one called them that. Ritual emerged not from command, but from desperation. While mortals wrestled with meaning, the spirits wrestled with consequence. They are learning faster than we imagined, Seryon murmured. They are suffering faster than they understand, Nimra replied. This is how worlds become stories, Avelos concluded. This is how stories become worlds. Generations later, settlements transformed into towns. In era then, clay huts became timber dwellings. Timber dwellings grew into clustered homes surrounding a central hearth where decisions were made. Elders debated hunting grounds. Craftsmen argued over tools. Healers experimented with roots and fungus, observing which soothed pain and which birthed nightmares. Knowledge passed from memory to instruction. And with instruction came hierarchy. Leadership did not form from strength alone. It formed from those who remembered best, who predicted most accurately, who convinced most persuasively. Politics was born, though no one named it. The first true city rose not from conquest, but harvest. Vestra sat between fertile riverbanks that flooded each spring. The floods brought silt. The silt brought wheat. Wheat demanded storage. Storage demanded planning. Planning demanded cooperation beyond family lines. Mud granaries became stone. Stone granaries became order. Order demanded rules. If wheat spoiled, who was to blame? If granaries burned, who paid? If thieves were caught, what punishment fit the crime? These questions forced Vestra to invent a council, 3 elders to judge disputes, 2 to allocate grain, and 1 to speak for the dead during burials. The dead must be counted, the burial speaker insisted. If we do not count our own, who will? Death became civic duty, not merely tragedy. Nimra smiled quietly at that. Not all progress was peaceful. Kelluran split over disagreement, whether to follow the dear north or remain near the salt-rich marshes. Half the tribe left, believing change meant survival. The other half stayed, believing tradition meant safety. Both believed they were right. Time would decide. Avelos took note. Choice is what turns life into history. As centuries shaped themselves into patterns, one truth became clear. Mortals would invent gods long before gods introduced themselves. Around the great fires of Vestra, storytellers no longer spoke of wind or river or stars as mere forces. They gave them intent. The wind guided hunters. The rain punished arrogance. The river judged offerings. The stars witnessed bargains. Intent requires personality. Personality becomes deity. Yet no deity descended. No miracle announced itself. No divine voice thundered from the mountains. Belief alone was enough. One night, beneath a sky thick with constellations, the council of Vestra gathered in the city square. Crops had failed for 2 seasons. Sickness stalked the western houses. Fishermen swore the river no longer favored them. Arguments flared: trade more, pray more, sacrifice more, explore more. Words collided like stones in a riverbed. Finally, an elder named Raman stood. His voice was soft, but soft voices carry when desperation listens. We have asked for favor, he said. We must now offer certainty. What certainty? Another demanded. A place for them, Raman replied, pointing toward the stars. Not gods. Not spirits. Not names. Them, the unseen witnesses of life. Silence followed. Then nods. Then agreement. They would build a structure, not for shelter, not for trade, but for meaning. The first temple was born, though the word did not yet exist. Construction took 6 years. Stones dragged from distant quarries, lifted with ropes woven from reeds, arranged into concentric rings around a raised platform. Open to the sky, because the sky was the only part of the world that had never bowed. Children asked what the structure was for. Their parents answered honestly. We do not know. But we must. On the final night of construction, the elders lit torches and placed the first harvested wheat at the altar. They waited for a sign. None came. But the absence of a sign did not kill belief. It concentrated it. What no one in Vestra could sense was that their offering echoed, not through earth or sky, but through the loom itself. Threads vibrated, faintly at first, then with rhythm. Avelos lifted his gaze. "They are calling," he whispered. Nimra folded her shadowed hands. "Suffering makes them sincere." Sarion's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "And sincerity deserves an answer." The time for silence was ending. The time for gods was beginning. When Vestra raised its stone rings to the sky, the world did not shake. The mountains did not bow. The rivers did not reverse. Creation seldom announces its turning points with spectacle, history prefers quiet hinges. And yet, in that quiet, something changed. For the first time since mortals had learned to bury their dead, they gathered not to mourn, nor to bargain for weather, but to acknowledge an unseen order. To admit, collectively, that the world possessed listeners. This idea alone was enough to shift the loom. Above the mortal plains, the spirits watched the temple's firelight scatter into the darkness. "It has taken them longer than I expected," Sarion murmured. "It has taken them less time than I feared," Nimra countered. Avelos studied the threads as they trembled. "They are calling. Not to us, not yet. But to something that must exist if their lives are to matter." "Meaning," Sarion said. "Closure," Nimra replied. "Continuity," Avelos concluded. Between those three desires, meaning, closure, continuity, religion would inevitably form. Not because gods demand worship, but because mortals demand reason. Seasons passed, and the temple became the axis of Vestra's civic life. It was where disputes ended and decisions began. Grain was stored in its shadow. Leaders argued in its echoing chambers. Children were brought there when they were born, and when they died. Ritual, once improvisational, became rule. At the equinox, wheat was placed on the altar. At the solstice, torches were lit. When sickness struck, jars of water were left at the steps. No one understood why these rituals mattered. That was not the point. Ritual gave shape to fear. And fear gave birth to hierarchy. In the 4th decade after the temple's completion, Vestra named its first high speaker, not a priest in the later sense, but a negotiator between the unknown and the desperate. She was called Ilra, daughter of potters, respected not for wealth nor lineage, but for her ability to quiet an argument and calm a frightened child. Ilra did not claim visions. She claimed observation. "People are stories wrapped in hunger," she once told the council. "They want answers when answers do not exist. My role is to give them better questions." Her influence grew, not by force, but by comprehension. Meanwhile, across the plains in Amin, belief evolved differently. Amin's hunters did not fear death, they feared being forgotten. Their dead were wrapped in painted hides, adorned with feathers and pigments, then placed atop the cliffs where vultures circled. The sky became their passage, the wind their messenger. To Amin, heaven was memory. To Vestra, heaven was order. Different fears, different gods, though neither settlement used those words. Kelluran, torn generations earlier, faced its own revelation. The group that had followed the dear north discovered metal in the highland rocks, a soft, reddish ore that hardened when heated. They shaped it into blades sharper than flint, tools that cut faster, spears that pierced deeper. With metal came power. Subtle, silent, and intoxicating. The southern Kelluran, who had stayed behind, did not have such tools. They had salt and marsh reeds, valuable but not lethal. When the two groups met again, they no longer laughed at pantomime. They stared at one another with wariness. Progress divides more often than it unites. While mortals expanded outward, the spirits expanded inward. Thought became identity. Identity became role. Seryon began to embody dawn, invention, and ambition, the forces that pushed mortals to build, to explore, to refuse stagnation. Nimra became tied to death, closure, and memory, not destruction for its own sake, but the necessity of ending so life could evolve. Avelos stood between them as the binding principle of cycles, law, and cause, the silent arbiter of consequence. They did not choose these domains. Mortals assigned them through belief, and belief writes ontologies stronger than command. For gods do not create worship. Worship creates gods. In Vestra, Ilra began noticing a pattern: when offerings were made with gratitude, nothing happened. When offerings were made in desperation, coincidences bloomed. A fever broke after a night of prayer, not always, but often enough to matter. A drought ended after sacrifices, not quickly, but reliably enough to remember. Traders returned from journeys thought impossible, not unharmed, but alive. Ilra did not call these miracles. She called them bargains. What we give, she told the council, is not consumed. It is witnessed. If witnessed, then by whom? An elder asked. That, Ilra replied, is not yet my concern. The council did not understand. They accepted anyway. Leaders often accept before they comprehend. This is the essence of governance. One night, during the autumn festival, a boy collapsed in the temple courtyard. His mother, sobbing, placed his limp body before Ilra. He cannot breathe, she pleaded. The sickness has taken him. Ilra knelt, feeling the boy's pulse flutter like a frightened bird. His lungs wheezed, drowning in their own fluid. There was no cure, not in Vestra, not in any settlement. The mother whispered names, not of gods, but of mountains, rivers, and stars. The boy's breath slowed. The crowd held its collective inhale. Ilra looked upward through the opening of the stone rings. If there is witness beyond sky, she said, voice trembling, then witness now. She did not ask for healing. She asked for meaning. The boy exhaled once more. Then died. Grief erupted. The mother wailed. Elders muttered of curses. Some demanded more offerings. Others demanded an end to ritual entirely. Ilra raised her hand. Silence fell. If the world listened, she said, it did not answer in the way we desired. But it answered in the way it must. Nimra's shadow passed over Vestra that night, unseen, but felt. Not as punishment. As balance. While mortals grieved, the spirits debated. They are learning value, Nimra said softly. Nothing precious survives without cost. They seek meaning even in loss, Seryon observed. Loss is how wisdom begins. Loss is also how war begins, Avelos reminded them. All three looked toward Kelluran. Metal had made hunters bold. And boldness is seldom content with boundaries. The first conflict between settlements did not begin with bloodshed. It began with trade. Kelluran offered metal blades for Vestra's wheat. The exchange prospered for 6 summers, strengthening both cities. But prosperity is a temporary truce between hunger and ambition. When a late frost killed half of Vestra's crops, the council begged Kelluran for more grain than usual. Kelluran refused unless Vestra paid triple, not in wheat, but in labor. Vestra agreed. Laborers traveled north to quarry stone and fell timber. Among the workers was a young man named Arioan, who listened more than he spoke. He observed Kelluran's forges, their methods of smelting, their knives and spearheads cooling in troughs of water that hissed like serpents. Arioan asked questions the smiths did not expect. Why does the metal bend before it hardens? What makes it shine? Why does it cut the flesh without tearing? The smiths offered no answers. They did not need to understand craft to practice it. But Arioan understood something else: knowledge is a weapon more subtle than metal. When his labor contract ended, he returned to Vestra carrying not tools, but ideas. Ideas are harder to detect than blades, and infinitely more dangerous. The next decade reshaped Vestra more swiftly than the last century. Forges emerged in back alleys. Kilns burned late into the night. Arioan trained apprentices. Metalwork spread. Kelluran did not mind at first. Trade endured. But when Vestra began producing its own spearheads, Kelluran's leaders recognized a threat. Dependency had become parity. Parity rarely remains peace. As Vestra armed itself, Ilra observed two converging transformations. Mortals had learned to bargain with the unknown, and to bargain with each other. One form of negotiation pushed upward toward the divine, the other pushed outward toward political conflict. Both demanded sacrifice. One night, Ilra returned to the temple alone. She lit a small oil lamp and placed grains upon the altar, not as tribute, but as question. "What do we owe the world?" she whispered. "And what does the world owe us?" For the first time, there was an answer. A breeze, slow, deliberate, extinguished the lamp. Ilra froze. The air smelled faintly of dust and rain. The shadows thickened, not with menace, but with presence. Not a god descending. Not a voice booming. Not miracle. Only acknowledgement. Sometimes acknowledgement is enough. Ilra lowered her head. "If you are witness," she murmured, "then know this: we are not kneeling to surrender. We are kneeling to negotiate." Seryan smiled. Nimra listened. Avelos wove. The first pact between mortal and immortal was struck, not by divine decree, but by mutual curiosity. But pacts rarely survive contact with ambition. Kelluran's young war leader, armored in metal and pride, had begun to ask his own questions. If our ancestors hunted beasts, why should we not hunt cities? In the plains between Vestra and Kelluran, scouts moved in silence. Spears gleamed. Wheat fields swayed. The temple fires in Vestra flickered uncertainly. War was not yet here. But war was no longer unthinkable. Not peace, not harmony, silence. A silence heavy with questions no one wants to ask aloud. In Vestra, those questions came at night. Why are Kelluran scouts so close to our fields? Why do their traders count our granaries? Why does their war leader watch our city walls as though measuring them? And beneath those questions lived the most dangerous curiosity of all. What would happen if they attacked, and won? The tension did not start with armies. It started with grain. That year, Vestra's winter was harsher than memory could provide. Frost devoured half the fields. Livestock starved. Children coughed through nights that felt longer than time itself. Kelluran, with its highland metals and preserved meat, prospered. Scarcity is the author of ambition. At the council table of Vestra, elders argued over whether diplomacy still held value. Some insisted on tribute. Others insisted on armament. Ilra, the high speaker, suggested a third path. We must understand what they desire before we guess what they demand. Curiosity, when used wisely, prevents war. But curiosity, when delayed, invites it. In Kelluran, the young war leader, now called Varek, stood at the cliff edge overlooking the plains. His armor gleamed faintly in the dawn. The metal was imperfect, hammered unevenly, but its presence alone changed ecosystems of power. He did not ask whether war was just. He asked whether war was possible. His advisors whispered of Vestra's granaries, of Amin's hunting grounds, of Sorel's cliffs, each a piece of geography with potential. Varek did not crave destruction. He craved control. And control, in a world without kings, was the closest thing to godhood mortals could yet imagine. But Varek had another curiosity, one he shared with no one. What watches us from above? And why does it not interfere? He had seen too many coincidences in Vestra's favor, rains ending drought, storms shielding their caravans, fevers breaking after temple rituals. Coincidence, when repeated, resembles intervention. While mortals prepared for war in their own way, the spirits debated conflict from afar. Seryan hovered over the plains, tracing invisible lines between settlements. War is innovation, he said. It breeds machines, strategies, alliances. Nimra followed the funeral smoke of winter's dead. War is memory, she replied. It teaches mortals that life is brief and meaning is expensive. Avelos examined the loom, where threads began to entwine, some tightening, some fraying. War is necessary, he concluded. It prevents stagnation. And stagnation kills worlds faster than bloodshed. But even as they observed, a new question formed among them. If mortals wage war for hunger and ambition, for what do immortals wage it? No one answered. Not yet. As spring thawed the rivers, Vestra's scouts reported that Kelluran's warriors had begun drilling in formations along the northern ridge. Formations, not mere hunting bands. Formations imply instruction. Instruction implies doctrine. Doctrine implies intent. Curiosity turned to fear. Fear turned to preparation. Arioan, the blacksmith who once gathered knowledge instead of blades, now forged spearheads day and night. His apprentices hammered metal into shields reinforced with boiled leather. Smoke from the forges stained the dawn black. Ilra visited Arioan's workshop, watching sparks leap like fireflies. "Do you believe they will march against us?" she asked. Arioan struck the metal once more, listening to its song. "I believe curiosity has already pushed them beyond return," he said. No war begins with swords. War begins when one side wonders if they deserve more. Ilra's silence was confirmation. In Amin, hunters observed both cities with uneasy fascination. They had no forges, no temples, no granaries, only mobility and instinct. Their archers could strike a deer at distances Vestrans called impossible. Their elders met in the shadow of the cliffs. "If Vestra and Kelluran destroy one another," an elder noted, "we will have plains for hunting again. But if a victor rises," another countered, "their hunger will turn toward us." Curiosity again, the kind that makes observers choose between patience and preemption. Across the plains, strange omens began appearing. A fevered boy in Sorel whispered names in his sleep, names no mortal had uttered. In Vestra, a merchant swore that the stars above the temple shifted into patterns resembling blades. In Kelluran, a black wolf descended from the highlands and lay at Varek's feet before vanishing into the mist. The scouts who witnessed it claimed it was a blessing. Ilra, upon hearing the rumors, did not call them omens. She called them interpretations. When mortals fear the future, she told the council, they look upward for answers. When they desire the future, they look inward. Neither method is reliable. But reliability was no longer the goal. Certainty was. And certainty is the fuel of war. The first clash was small, almost forgettable. A Vestran's forager was caught gathering roots near the border. Kelluran's patrols demanded tax. The forager refused. A spear was drawn. A warning was shouted. The spear struck. The forager fell. Vestra demanded compensation, not gold, not grain, but apology. Kelluran refused. Apologies imply fault. Fault implies weakness. Weakness invites invasion. When Vestra's emissaries returned empty-handed, the council met under the temple's open roof. Fires flickered against the stone rings, casting dancing shadows that reminded everyone present how thin their lives had become. We cannot surrender our fields, one elder insisted. We cannot match their iron, another argued. We must seek allies, Arioan offered. Ilra listened until the arguments tangled into frustration, then spoke. War is not the opposite of negotiation. War is negotiation by other means. The elders stared, unsettled. What do you propose? They asked. I propose we ask the unseen what it intends, Ilra replied. But that suggestion seeded a deeper curiosity. One that spread through Vestra like a whispered secret. Do the unseen powers choose sides? That night, Ilra returned to the temple alone and lit a modest flame. If you witness, she murmured, then witness fully. If mortals bleed for ambition, let it not be for illusions. Show us what is at stake. No divine light answered. No miracle unfolded. Instead, the flame bent sideways, not extinguished, not brightened, simply bent, as though drawn by something beyond the walls, toward the northern plains. Ilra felt her breath catch. Direction is more revealing than speech. Meanwhile, in Kelluran's war council, Varek examined crude clay maps of the plains. We strike at harvest, he declared. Their granaries will be full. Their morale will be broken before winter. One advisor hesitated. Vestra's high speaker negotiates with the unknown. If the spirits bless them. Varek cut him off. If spirits existed, they would favor the strong. And strength is not inherited. It is demonstrated. He paused, fingers tracing the edge of a bronze blade. Besides, he added, I am curious which world the unseen prefers, the world of waiting, or the world of taking. Curiosity had turned into challenge. In the realm of spirits, threads tightened. Seryan leaned closer. The mortal court prepares. Nimra responded, and so must the immortal one. Avelos did not smile. They will not ask for our aid. They will ask for meaning. And meaning is always more dangerous. Beneath them, the plains shimmered in the red dusk of late summer, as though the sky itself tasted blood long before it spilled. As the first armies assembled, as scouts stalked the high grass, as mothers counted children and granaries whispered of hunger, a new rumor crept through Vestra. Someone, unidentified, unseen, had been carving symbols into the stones of the temple at night. Symbols no one recognized. Symbols no child claimed. Symbols that had not been taught, but remembered. The curiosity became panic. What language is this? The elders asked. Ilra did not answer. Because she did not know whether the carvings were warnings. Or invitations. History does not change when swords are drawn. History changes when people believe those swords matter. By midsummer, for settlements dominated the southern plains. Vestra, wheat and temples. Kelluran, iron and ambition. Amin, archers and memory. Sorel, cliffs and ritual. They were not kingdoms, nor tribes. They were something new, city-states, though no one yet spoke that word. Their competition was not only for land or food, but for meaning. Meaning is always the most expensive resource. Vestra struggled under the weight of anticipation. Every citizen felt war coming long before any soldier marched. Mothers gathered children early from the fields. Healers boiled herbs until nightfall. Storytellers whispered different endings to the same future. Ilra listened more than she spoke. Curiosity drove her, not certainty. She wanted to understand why conflict was inevitable, not merely whether Vestra could win it. Late one evening, she summoned Arioen to the temple. "You study weapons," she said. "But do you study men?" Arioen wiped forged soot from his hands. "Men are simpler than iron. Iron bends the way I want. Men bend the way circumstances demand." "And what of gods?" Ilra asked. Arioen hesitated. "I do not know if gods exist. But I do know that men behave differently when they believe they are being watched." Curiosity flickered between them, sharp as a blade's edge. Perhaps belief itself was the most dangerous weapon of all. In Kelluran, Varek's army expanded beyond necessity. Warriors trained in formations borrowed from hunting packs. Shields locked into walls. Spears angled downward. Tactics learned from wolves. But Kelluran's advisors faced another dilemma: victory required more than metal. It required justification. No city wants to see itself as aggressor. Aggression without narrative collapses morale. So the council began to rewrite the story. Vestra had insulted them. Vestra withheld tribute. Vestra was a threat to peace. Narratives make war righteous long before war makes narratives famous. Far away in Amin, the sky watchers stared at constellations and muttered among themselves. For decades they had charted the stars not to worship them, but to predict migrations. Now, patterns made no sense. The constellation of the hunter arrived early. The sisters who never sleep dipped lower. And the crimson star near the horizon, seen only in rare seasons, refused to fade. "What does it mean?" young hunters asked. The elders did not answer. Confession: elders fear questions they cannot answer more than they fear war. Meanwhile in Sorel, rituals grew stranger. The cliff burials, once symbolic offerings to the sky, now included whispered phrases passed down from fevered dreams. No one remembered their origin, yet no one dared abandon them. At night, the sick claimed to see silhouettes moving along the cliff edges, not spirits, not beasts, but figures that watched and vanished when approached. When asked what they wanted, the elderly burial speaker replied, "Nothing watches without purpose. The purpose will reveal itself when we decide whether the dead matter." An unsettling curiosity. If death is a doorway, who built the other side? For the spirits, curiosity became urgency. Seryan traced the mortal lines of invention: metal, grain, ritual, trade, myth. "They are accelerating," he noted. "If we speak too soon, they will not understand. If we speak too late," Nimra warned, "they will demand answers we are not prepared to give." Avelos examined the loom, now crowded with threads tugging in unpredictable patterns. The age of choices has dawned. Choices lead to fate. Fate leads to law. And law binds gods as firmly as men. Seryan turned. Law. Who wrote law? Avelos did not blink. Mortals will. Nimra added softly. And we will be forced to obey whatever they believe. That was the twist few gods expected. Worship does not chain mortals to gods. Worship chains gods to expectation. Back in Vestra, Ilra examined the temple carvings, the mysterious symbols etched into the stones. She traced them with charcoal, redrawing them onto clay tablets, comparing shapes, angles, and repeating marks. Some resembled stars. Some resembled spears. Some resembled paths. Paths to where? No one knew. Ilra invited Erioan to see. He stared at the symbols for a long time before speaking. They are not marks of children, he said. Nor are they Kelluran script. And if they are meant for gods, they are written for gods who learned before writing existed. Ilra nodded. Then the question is not who carved them, but why. Erioan answered, curiosity. Ilra whispered, or warning. Outside the temple, a raven shrieked and flew north, toward Kelluran. By late summer, Vestra could no longer ignore the border skirmishes. Patrols vanished. Smoke rose from distant farms. One evening, fishermen returned claiming they had seen Kelluran warriors along the riverbank sharpening spears. The council argued for hours. We must negotiate. We must retaliate. We must pray. We must flee. Ilra listened. Then she spoke a sentence that silenced the chamber. We must understand what victory looks like before we decide what war means. The elders frowned. Victory means survival. Perhaps, Ilra replied. But survival at what cost? If Vestra survives as Kelluran's slave, is that victory? If Vestra wins but loses its grain, is that victory? If Vestra kills Kelluran's sons, and Amin retaliates, and Sorel starves, is that victory? The council had no answer. This is the curse of curiosity. Questions are sharper than swords. War finally arrived on a morning so quiet that birds refused to sing. Verek's army descended from the highland path in disciplined ranks. Shields glinted. Spears bristled. That crimson star hovered above them, a blood-stained witness. But Vestra was not unprepared. Erioan's new spearheads pierced metal armor with terrifying efficiency. Amin's archers, hired not as allies, but as opportunists, struck from the tree line with uncanny precision. The battle was brief. Brief, but not decisive. Bodies littered the riverbank. Blood mingled with wheat. Cries of victory drowned beneath cries of mourning. Kelluran fell back, regrouping. Vestra did not pursue. Curiosity replaced triumph. What would Kelluran do next? During the night, Verek studied the battlefield. He examined the new Vestran's blades, turning them over in his hand. Who taught them to forge, he asked. No one, a scout replied. They learned by watching us. This disturbed Verek more than defeat. Weapons kill armies. Ideas kill empires. In the temple, Ilra lit 7 candles, one for each death reported before dawn. She recorded names to ensure memory. Nimra watched from far overhead, her shadow stretching across the plains. Ilra whispered to the flame, "Is this the cost of meaning?" No wind answered. Instead, one candle flickered violently, as though reacting to an unseen breath. Ilra froze. A question formed, unspoken but undeniable. If fate exists, who enforces it? The next morning, children in Sorel awoke screaming. They claimed they had dreamed of a winter with no end. A winter that swallowed crops, cities, and names. The burial speaker listened to their trembling accounts, then addressed the elders. Winter does not come without reason. Something has been promised. Something must be paid. But what debt demanded such a price? And who, mortal or immortal, had signed the bargain? The winter curse and the Veilborn prophecy. War rarely ends when the battlefield quiets. It ends when stories about that battlefield cease to change, and stories never stop changing. For weeks after the river clash, both Vestra and Kelleron counted their wounded, buried their dead, and rewrote their versions of victory. Kelleron claimed Vestra was cowardly for refusing pursuit. Vestra claimed Kelleron retreated in fear of the unknown. Both were wrong. Both were right. Truth is never the objective of war. Memory is. But while mortals argued over cause and consequence, Sorel dreamed of winter. At first, only the burial speaker whispered of omens. Then the children started screaming in sleep. Then the elders dreamed too. A winter of no thaw. A winter that gnawed through cattle, grain, and bone. A winter where names faded faster than breath. Rumors traveled like smoke across the plains. Amin's hunters claimed the northern winds carried voices. Kelleron's smiths swore metals cracked in the forge for no reason. Vestra's farmers found frost on wheat in midsummer dawn. Fear asked the first question. Is this a curse? Curiosity asked the second. If cursed, then by whom? No one dared ask the third. If cursed, then why? In Vestra's council chamber, Ilra listened to reports from every border. The frost is light, one elder insisted. Nothing unusual. Light frost in summer is unusual, Arion corrected quietly. The dreams are children's tales, another elder scoffed. Children do not invent what they cannot imagine, Ilra replied. Silence. Curiosity always outlives denial. Meanwhile, Varek in Kelleron took the rumors as advantage. If winter is coming, he told his advisors, then Vestra will starve first. Their crops are their throne. A starving city bargains poorly. But Amin, an advisor asked. Amin hunts. Amin observes. Amin survives whether we war or not. Let them watch. And Sorel? Sorel fears death. They will open their gates to any power that lets them bury their ancestors properly. This analysis was not cruel, only accurate. The most dangerous leaders are those who understand people, not weapons. In the spirit realm, winter's rumors stirred threads that had not moved in millennia. Seryan observed the mortal panic with fascination. They see patterns before patterns exist. This is how intelligence evolves. Nimra walked among fresh graves, fingers ghosting over cairns of stone. They sense endings before endings arrive. This is how wisdom evolves. Avilo studied the loom's shifting tension. And they fear fate before fate is declared. This is how belief evolves. Belief is the only force mortals and gods share equally. The dreams from Sorel reached Vestra faster than birds could carry news. Traders described children waking with blood on their lips from screaming. Elders claimed to see snow falling through closed windows. Herds refused to graze near rivers, as though sensing something beneath the water. Ilra kept a detailed record of every account, not because she believed them, but because patterns reveal themselves only when observed without panic. Arion, by contrast, did not record dreams. He collected blades. War is not over, he told Ilra quietly. It is changing shape. What shape? She asked. The shape of hunger. Hunger is the architect of desperate decisions. At the next equinox, with fields uncertain and rumors thickening, Vestra held a public assembly. People crowded around the temple's stones, anxious for direction. Ilra climbed the altar steps, not as priestess, not as ruler, but as moderator between ignorance and speculation. The world changes, she began. And change frightens us. So let us ask clearly, will winter destroy us? The crowd muttered, restless. Answers demanded certainty. Certainty demanded authority. Authority demanded risk. Then a boy in the crowd exclaimed, "Ask the gods." The crowd turned to Ilra. "What do the gods say?" they cried. "Do they curse us or guard us?" Their desperation was not insolence. It was hunger for narrative. Humans cannot endure chaos without story. Ilra chose her words carefully. "The gods do not speak in commands," she said. "They speak in consequences." It was the most honest sentence anyone had spoken in months. But honesty cannot calm hunger. That night, Ilra returned to the temple. Instead of offerings, she carried questions. "How do we survive winter born from fear?" she whispered. "How do we answer questions born from curiosity?" For a moment, nothing stirred. Then a draft crept through the temple, cold enough to frost the stones beneath her palms. The torchlight wavered, its flame bending toward the north, just as it had months earlier. This time, the breeze carried sound. Not words. Not breath. Something between memory and warning. Ilra closed her eyes and listened. The whisper was simple. "Prepare." Then silence. Ilra trembled. Not because the gods had spoken, but because they had not spoken enough. In Sorel, the burial speaker finally revealed what the children had whispered in dreams. "They speak of one called the Veilborn," she told the elders. "A mortal born not from womb alone, but from moment. A bridge between story and survival." "Prophecies," one elder scoffed. "Stories for frightened minds." "Perhaps," the speaker said. "Yet frightened minds have predicted more history than proud ones." The elders fell silent. Curiosity pierced doubt like arrows through hide. In Kelluran, Varek received scouts' reports of frost, dreams, and whispers with a soldier's pragmatism. "Prophecies do not win battles," he said. But the advisor who had studied Amin replied, "Prophecies win armies. Armies win battles." Varek paused. For the first time, prophecy appealed to ambition. Amin's hunters tracked an early snowline creeping down from the northern ridges. It melted by dawn, but the elders read the sign differently. "Winter will not wait for war to finish," they warned. "Winter will finish war." In the realm of spirits, Seryon finally voiced the question none dared ask. "Who is the Veilborn?" Nimra answered without hesitation. "Not a hero. Heroes end stories. The Veilborn begins one." Avelos added. "Fate requires a witness." "And winter?" Seryon asked. "Winter," Nimra whispered, "is the test." As autumn arrived with unnatural chill, Vestra sealed its granaries, Kelluran drilled twice daily, Amin shifted hunting grounds, and Sorel carved symbols into burial stones. The symbols matched those appearing in Vestra's temple. Someone, or something, was riding across cities without permission. But for what purpose? Warning? Instruction? Threat? Covenant? Curiosity suffocated certainty. On the first night of frost, a child in Vestra vanished. Not stolen. Not devoured. vanished, leaving only footprints that ended at the stone altar of the temple. By dawn, the symbol of the Veilborn was carved into the altar's surface. No mortal hand had touched the stone. No one knew what the symbol meant. But everyone knew what it demanded. A pact. With whom? And at what cost? No one yet dared to guess. The pact of lanterns and the last siege. Before the curse could be defined, before the prophecy could be interpreted, before the war could conclude, a single disappearance reshaped every fear into purpose. The child from Vestra had vanished without scream or struggle. Footprints ended at the altar, not behind it, not beyond it, but at it, as though the stone had opened its jaw and swallowed fate whole. By dawn, a symbol waited on the altar's surface. Sharper than tools. Deeper than chisels. Crafted not by carving, but by permission. Ilra recognized it immediately. She had traced its shape weeks earlier in Sorel's burial stones, and months earlier in the temple's secret markings. The sigil of the Veilborn. What does it mean? The council demanded. Ilra did not answer. Not because she lacked knowledge, but because meaning is never single. Meaning is negotiated. Kelleron interpreted the event differently. To Varek, the sigil was no prophecy, it was leverage. News travels fastest when fed to ambition. If Vestra's gods chose a child, then Vestra had reason to hesitate. And hesitation is a gift to conquerors. We strike before winter, Varek told his generals. Before their omens become courage. Kelleron forged armor through nights so cold the rivers steamed. War drums echoed over the highlands. The scent of oil and metal clung to the air like premonition. Winter's breath whispered across the plains. But Varek did not fear winter. He feared irrelevance. Ambition fears nothing more than being forgotten. Amin faced the prophecy with disquieted pragmatism. Their elders gathered beneath constellations, tracing patterns with bone tools and cautious breath. The Veilborn, whispered the Skywatcher, walks paths between worlds. And these paths, asked a hunter. They lead to victory. Or defeat, the hunter countered. The Skywatcher smiled faintly. Defeat is simply a victory that chose another name. Amin would not choose sides until sides mattered. Sorel embraced the omen wholeheartedly. The burial speaker lit white candles along the cliffs, not for mourners, but for messengers. The dead must know what comes, she told her people. For winter is not merely cold. Winter is a contract. And who signed it? Elders asked. She only looked toward Vestra. Curiosity carried no answers. Only direction. In Vestra, panic demanded action. If a child vanished, then the city demanded a pact. Not with Kelleron. Not with Amin. Not with Sorel. But with the unseen. Ilra assembled citizens in the temple courtyard as dusk bled into blue shadows. We cannot defeat winter, she announced. But we can negotiate with whatever commands it. The crowd murmured. Negotiate? With winter? Ilra raised her palms. Winter punishes excess. Winter preserves memory. Winter protects truth. Winter is not our enemy. Winter is our examiner. Then what does winter demand? Asked a farmer. A witness, Ilra answered. Perhaps that child. Gasps. Whispers. Wonder. Fear. All the currencies of ritual. To negotiate, Vestra prepared the pact of lanterns, 77 oil lanterns lit at twilight and placed along the temple's outer wall, forming a ring of amber flame. Each lantern represented a question. Not a sacrifice. Not a plea. A question. What does the Veilborn seek? Will winter spare the worthy? Is war part of the bargain? Can fate be delayed? Can gods be persuaded? Curiosity became illumination. The wall glowed like a constellation inverted onto earth. Ilra stood before the altar and declared, "We offer inquiry in place of fear. We will not kneel to power we do not understand. Let the unseen answer if it wills, or remain silent, and let winter speak for it." Silence followed. Then, wind. Not a gust. Not a howl. A deliberate breeze that extinguished exactly 9 lanterns. Not 8. Not 10. 9. Ilra trembled, scribbling the positions of the extinguished flames. "Patterns," murmured Arioan. "Everything answers in patterns. But what pattern? And why 9? 9 was not a sacred number in Vestra. But in Sorel, 9 belonged to burial rites. And in Amin, 9 belonged to star charts. And in Kelluran knew nothing of 9. Kelluran knew only victory. 2 nights later, Kelluran marched. Not under banners of glory, but beneath skies the color of blood diluted with milk. Their torches formed a line of fire snaking down from the high ridges, a spectacle no storyteller could embellish without insulting reality. Vestra's bells tolled. The gates closed. Archers took their posts. Amin watched from tree-lean shadows. Sorel prayed on the cliffs. War did not arrive as chaos. It arrived as inevitability. Varek stood before Vestra's walls and shouted terms. "Open your granaries and your temple, and no blood need spill." Ilra stood on the parapet and replied evenly. "The only thing open tonight is the question of who commands winter." Varek hesitated. Not because he feared gods, but because he feared questions without answers. Power hates unanswered questions. The siege began at dawn. Kelluran drove siege engines forward, clumsy but effective. Vestra countered with burning pitch and relentless arrows. Amin's hunters, compelled by neither alliance nor debt, joined the fray from the flanks, not for Vestra's sake, but to observe prophecy unfold from within its fire. Sorel chanted from the cliffs. Their rituals were not curses nor blessings, merely translations for the dead who gathered to witness history. Death must understand what it receives. As battle roared, winter crept. Snow fell though no clouds gathered. Frost laced spear handles. Breath thickened. Torches hissed and died. The Veilborn sigil flickered faintly along Vestra's temple stones as though lit from beneath the surface. Varek saw it and felt a sensation new to him. Not fear. Not awe. Relevance. "If prophecy comes," he whispered, "let it find me already marching." Inside the temple, Ilra and Arioan deciphered the 9 extinguished lanterns. 9 is direction, Arioan muttered. Not number. Direction to what? Ilra demanded. To where the Veilborn stands. Ilra's pulse quickened. But where? Before she could finish, a voice, soft, small, undeniably mortal, spoke behind them. Behind the veil. They turned. The child, The vanished child stood barefoot before the altar. No wounds. No frostbite. No fear. Only clarity. Ilra knelt. Are you the Veilborn? Ilra knelt. Are you the Veilborn? The child blinked. No, he answered. But I carry their answer. Ilra swallowed hard. And the answer? The child pointed toward the northern gates where Kelluran pressed hardest. The one who asks without reverence will be answered by winter. Ilra stared through the temple door as snow thickened around Verek's soldiers. Negotiation was over. Judgment had begun. As the sun set crimson behind the siege, a howl tore across the plains. Not wolf, not wind. Every soldier, Kelluran, Vestra, Amin, froze. The child whispered. The Veilborn arrives at dusk. No one asked what that meant. Because curiosity had finally become fear. The night that followed the siege belonged to no army. Not Vestra. Not Kelluran. Not Amin. Not Sorel. It belonged to winter. The snow deepened without storm. The frost thickened without wind. Every breath turned into fog that lingered too long, as though reluctant to leave the mouths that exhaled it. War froze mid-motion. Verek's spear halted inches from a Vestran's shield. Amin's arrow hovered against its bowstring. Priests in Sorel paused mid-chant. Even the bells in Vestra fell silent. Silence has greater command than kings. Then came the sound. Not a roar. Not thunder. Something older. It vibrated through soil and stone, through temples and granaries, through marrow and memory. Soldiers dropped to one knee not out of worship, but out of instinct, the instinct life obeys when it remembers its smallness. The child, the one who vanished, and returned, stepped forward through the temple gate and onto the frost-covered courtyard. His footprints did not sink. They glimmered. Ilra followed, but did not touch him. No one touched the future when it is still deciding what shape to wear. At the center of the battlefield, the snow parted in a perfect circle, revealing bare earth. The circle expanded, widening until both armies stood along its rim. Not mingled. Not separated. Witnesses. The air shimmered like a curtain of heat, but cold. A veil. Through it stepped a figure not dressed in gold nor crowned in jewels. No lightning framed their presence. No divine radiance blinded onlookers. In fact, their form was elegant in its restraint. Height neither towering nor mortal. Face neither young nor old. Eyes neither cruel nor kind. And yet, every soldier, every priest, every elder, every hunter understood. This was the Veilborn. Not a god. Not a king. Not a savior. A conclusion made flesh. Verek, trembling though he would never admit it, forced himself to speak. What are you? He demanded. A curse? A prophecy? A judge? The Veilborn tilted their heads slightly, curious, not offended. I am none of these. I am the debt paid. Debt to whom? Arioan asked. To time, the Veilborn answered. Time keeps no kingdom in balance without witness. War broke witness. Winter restored it. Ilra stepped forward. And the child? The child asked with reverence, the Veilborn replied. Questions asked with reverence do not go unanswered. Verek clenched his jaw. And what of conquest? What of victory? The Veilborn's expression softened. Victory is simply the name mortals give to postponed consequences. Erioan exhaled shakily. Ilra closed her eyes. Amin's hunters lowered their bows. Sorel's priests fell to their knees. The Veilborn raised a hand, palm open, empty. The pact is simple, they declared. Cities may grow. Wars may rise. Faith may change. But winter will return whenever meaning sleeps. And what of the gods, whispered Ilra. The Veilborn's gaze traveled beyond sight, toward Serion, Nimra, Avelos, watching from realms without horizon. Even gods obey seasons, they said. With that, the Veilborn placed their palm against the earth. The frost retreated. Snow melted. The crimson star faded into ordinary dusk. Winter exhaled, and slept. Not banished. Not defeated. Sleeping. Because winter never dies. It waits for questions to become careless again. When the veil finally dissolved, the child collapsed into Ilra's arms, breath warm, heartbeat steady. Varek lowered his spear. Amin vanished into tree leaves. Sorel lit candles for the unseen dead who had witnessed the pact. Nothing more needed to be said. The war ended without surrender. The prophecy ended without coronation. History ended without certainty. And that, perhaps, was what saved them. In the weeks that followed, Vestra and Kelluron exchanged grain for metal, not as tribute, not as victory, but as investment in futures neither wanted to forfeit. Amin resumed star mapping. Sorel wrote new burial rites that spoke not of fear, but of cycles. Ilra recorded the Veilborn encounter on clay tablets. Erioan forged tools shaped for plow instead of spear. And somewhere beneath the shifting firmament, the spirits whispered. Serion smiled. Mortals invent futures faster than we can imagine them. Nimra folded her cloak. Mortals remember endings more clearly than we can enforce them. Avelos spun the loom once more. Then the age of echoes begins. For centuries after, storytellers argued. Was the Veilborn mortal or divine? Did winter spare them or judge them? Was the pact blessing or warning? And most curious of all, would winter return? Every era asked differently. No era answered completely. Meaning does not conclude. Meaning echoes. And echoes become myth. And myth becomes time. Subscribe to the channel, so you do not miss the next journey beyond the veil. And keep your curiosity alive. Until then, wait for the next story. Because myths never leave. They only sleep. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe my channel for more myth videos. Good night.